Greetings and welcome to another edition of Political Empire. I'm your host, Kim Pierceall with the Press Enterprise and PE.com. And in our continuing effort to let voters know what they're going to be voting on when they go to the voting booth in November, we are going to be focused on propositions today. So before we've looked at a couple candidate races and congressional races and so forth, today we're focusing on Proposition 34 and Proposition 36. And with us today to tell us a little bit more about this is our reporter, Rich DeAtley. Rich, thanks so much for coming here today.
Welcome.
There are so many propositions on the ballot. Proposition 34 and 36 both have to do with law enforcement to a degree, 34 having to do with the death penalty, 36 having to do with the three strikes law. Let's go through Prop 34 first. So this would, in essence, if passed, repeal the death penalty in California?
It would end the death penalty in California. It will and transfer those who have been condemned, and now there's about 727 inmates on death row, to life in prison without parole. It further will orders them to work in prison. Some of that money goes to pay the victims' families and gives a $100 million grant to law enforcement to investigate murder and rape.
And where is it leaning so far? Is there...
It's leaning toward, the opposition is leading, but the UC Berkeley field poll that came out in late September, the difference is tight. It's there's 45% oppose the measure and 42% supporting it, 13% undecided.
Oh, wow.
That's within the 4.3 percentage range of the margin of error for that poll.
That's very tight. And as far as who's supporting it and who isn't, who are the backers behind the initiative and who's opposing it?
Backers include a lot of organizations, civil liberty organizations, and opponents, traditional opponents of the death penalty, and the opponents are the traditional people who would oppose it: law enforcement, prosecutors, etc. The argument is the death penalty, and there has not been an execution in California since 2006. The opponents of this measure say the death penalty just needs to be reformed on the process of appeals, et cetera, to make it come to a conclusion quicker. The proponents of this say it's a huge expenditure to the state of California, and because of the cost of the defense and appeals over years and years, which can take decades in many cases.
And you mentioned that if this were to pass, the sentences, the death sentences for some of these inmates would be converted to life in prison.
For all of them, would be life in prison without parole.
700 or so. Speaking of life in prison, there's another proposition on the ballot, and this kind of relates to individuals being sentenced to life in some circumstances for a third strike. Talk to us a little bit about Prop 36, because right now if someone commits a third offense, they can get pretty steep sentences.
They can get a 25-year to life sentence. What the backers of Prop 36 want to do is change the kind of crime you commit the third strike. Right now it is possible, it has happened, that people who have been convicted of minor or non-serious property crimes like shoplifting have gotten a third strike and have had this 25 years to life sentence. Right now it's estimated about 1/3 of the 8,900 three strikers in the California prison system were sentenced under such a situation. What the people who want to change it, what Prop 36 says, is that third strike should be the same kind of serious and violent crime that formulated the first two strikes. And right now, a poll taken by University of Southern California, Dornsife, Los Angeles Times, also in late September, has a 3-to-1 ratio supporting it.
Okay, so those folks who support this measure say that third strike should be a more serious offense than what it currently is considered, shoplifting and whatnot. And you were talking about an interesting case before we started filming that involved an individual who shoplifted vitamins. That was his third offense.
Right.
And he had a strict sentence. Tell us a little bit about that.
Michael Riggs, that was a Riverside case several years ago. His third strike, it was just at the beginning of the three strikes law after it had been passed in the early 90s, stole a bottle of vitamins, and that was used as a third strike against him. He got that 25-year to life sentence. He appealed all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. His appeal was denied, but the Supreme Court sent a note with that saying they were concerned about the kind of sentences that seemed to be meted out in these situations, and they were sort of said they were going to keep an eye on it. He eventually was released, but on a technicality, on essentially a latter-day plea deal with the Riverside County Prosecutor Office, where they essentially asked him to stop a Ninth Circuit appeal, and he would get credit for time served, and his third strike would be stricken, so to speak. So the resolution of his case had him leaving prison, but did not resolve any issues about the three strikes law.
Well, Rich, thanks so much for giving us an update on these. Both propositions have pretty high stakes for especially the individuals who are on death row and victims' families and so forth, and then obviously the individuals who have been sentenced to 25 to life terms for a third offense. Thanks so much. Again, Prop 34 for voters out there has to do with repealing the death penalty in California. Prop 36 has to do with the three strikes law and whether or not that third strike should be more strict than what it is currently. So thanks so much for joining us today. Thank you to Rich DeAtley for explaining some of those propositions to us, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow for another edition of Political Empire.